I want to ask a question. Is your mind an ally or a tyrant? When your mind is an ally, it's a friend. It's something that's helping you along. It's improving the quality of your life. It's an advantage to have it. Versus a tyrant, which is just the opposite. In fact, actually, one of the more interesting comments that I've heard regarding consciousness is that it's nature's most ingenious device for self-torture. And the first time I heard that, I thought it was a pretty profound comment. Because for a lot of people, that's exactly what the mind has turned into. It is the most horrendous thing they could possibly have. Everything that they experience, their horrible emotional fits, their lack of meaning, their frustrations and anxieties and suffering, and all of these different afflictive emotions are the result of maintaining a system of understanding that's just not that useful. So I want to talk about these different systems of understanding, and I want to see if you're using it properly. If the mind is being used to your advantage or to your disadvantage. To start with here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk about the conceptual model that I've used to wrap around reality. I took a long time to think about this, and I wanted to find out what is the most fundamental idea, the most rudimentary concept that I have, that all of my other ideas are sort of built upon. There's one idea that crept up that I think that's a good starting point, at least. The conceptual system that I have, the foundation is that I took reality and I divided it up into individual building blocks, into fragments. And what I did is I ended up giving labels to these separate pieces. So, to give an example, let's just say you're walking through a park and you look to your right. There's a group of trees. And then you think to yourself, whoa, there's a birch. There's a pine tree. That's an oak. That's a willow. Over to your left, you see a jungle gym. You see a slide. Toddlers playing around, a worried parent sitting over a kid that fell on the concrete, and in front of you is a gazebo. People are grilling. There's birds up in the sky. There's seagulls. You can hear it all squawking, and dogs barking, and everything that you look at, you've assigned a label to it. And each and every one of these labels are artificial. Because breaking up reality into different units is actually artificial as well. That's a mental concept. And actually, it's one of the most profound moments of my life, I remember, is that when I realized that the way that we break up reality is, in fact, an artificial system. In the same way that the lines of latitude and longitude are artificial systems, or the grid lines in a planetarium are artificial systems. But the way that we parceled out the universe into these individual building blocks, like when we think about, the idea of atoms, and then molecules, and macromolecules, and cells, tissues, organs, organ systems, the organism, population, ecosystem, biosphere, planet, galaxy, supercluster, and so forth. Words, labels, breaking up reality, and then we break up reality, and then we try to relate the pieces back together. But they were never separate to begin with. That's just sort of the idea. There was no sense of separation. That's a mental concept. We've divided it up in our minds, but it's not actually divided. It's a unified suchness. It's a wholeness. And another way to sort of view that is like, say you're sitting by a fire, and an eagle swoops down and snatches a fish from the stream. And then further up the stream, you notice there's a kayaker enjoying the scenery. And then you notice the sounds of your fire crackling. and the taste of your coffee. Now, within our minds, you can basically take each of these different situations and view it as being a separate event. So say, for example, like event number 1 is going to be the eagle swooping down and picking up the fish. Event number 2, the person in the stream, in the kayak. Event number 3, the sounds of the fire. Event number 4, the taste of your coffee. All of these different events that you were experiencing, you may think that they're separate in your mind, but to be honest, it was all a single event. And that event was what the universe was doing right at that moment. It was a single event. There was no separate events within that situation, but with your mind you can divide it up into separate events. But this can be useful. In fact, actually, the idea of breaking up reality into separate pieces is a very useful concept indeed, because it makes it more manageable. Trying to think about all of reality at once is an overwhelming task. It's impossible to do. So by breaking it up, by viewing things within their own little boxes and categories that we've placed them in, it makes it so we can speak about these things and we can talk about abstract ideas or practical situations in our environment. Timmy fell in the well. Like, we know each and every one of these words has a certain meaning, and by stringing it all together, we can, have a coherent transference of information, and it's useful. But again, I just want to point out that these are tools. They're not actual features of reality. They're mental creations, and they can be extremely useful. In the way that I view the system, they're useful in 2 different ways. First of all, your mental way of organizing reality is useful if it correlates with your experience. And it's useful if it improves the quality of your life. Those are sort of the 2 different ways in which I view whether or not your system of understanding is your ally, or if you're using it properly, or using it to your own advantage, or if it's being a tyrant and your model of reality doesn't correlate with experience, or your model of reality doesn't make your life more meaningful, but in fact actually makes it more frustrating and stressful and anxiety-ridden and so forth. So the first one is, or my first idea of evaluating systems of understanding or mental concepts is, does it correlate with experience? And I think that if your model of reality doesn't correlate with experience, it's completely useless. It's like if you have a model of reality that suggests that if you have a great hunger, just go eat sand. That'll quench your hunger. Or if you're thirsty, go drink seawater. That'll quench your thirst. Again, if your model of reality predicts that, this is going to be completely useless, because when you go and eat the sand or drink the salt water, you're either going to get more hungry or more thirsty. It doesn't satisfy those types of urges. Or if your model of reality suggested that if you want to go from this room to the next one, you can just walk right through the wall. And you test it out, and lo and behold, you swat into the wall. You can't walk through matter. It seems to block the path. But again, in that situation, your model of reality, your system of understanding was not consistent with your experience, and therefore it wasn't helping you out. It wasn't being a useful tool. In fact, actually, in some situations, that mental idea could be extremely dangerous to you if you held on to it. For example, if you had a mental system that suggested that you could, survive a bullet to the head, you could die testing out that model of reality. So it can be extremely dangerous. But the more subtle part of evaluation, the more of a value that I've attached onto it as well, is that does it improve the quality of your life? So not only does your model of reality have a predictive power to it, but it also should have a qualitative element where you can actually experience more joy, more elation or happiness, beauty, freedom, love, compassion, empathy, all these different wonderful emotions. Does it allow you to experience these more frequently? Sort of give an example. All right, there are certain people who have systems of reality or systems of understanding reality that suggest that mental states are the result of brain states. So there's a certain reaction that occurs in your brain, the neurophysiology and the chemical absorptions and the electrical pulsations all occur in such a way that a mental phenomenon arises out of this complexity. And the mental phenomenon is completely determined by the chemistry going on. So they feel determined. They feel as though that there is absolutely no responsibility. It's certain chemical reactions that are occurring in the brain. You can't prevent those. And in the same way that a rock falls to the ground, you're going to get frustrated when you see something in your environment that you don't like, that you had no control over, and so on and so forth. But again, this is an attitude. To say that consciousness is the result of brain states, or the result of your neurophysiology, that's an attitude. You don't know that. Reality could be just the opposite for all you know. It could be consciousness itself creating a pattern, and that pattern looks like the whole neurophysiology. But it's consciousness as a primary cause, or as the cause, and the effect is the brain chemistry that we can observe. But it's consciousness, the shape of consciousness. And it's not the matter that created the consciousness, it's consciousness that created the appearance of matter. So it flipped the whole scenario on its head. But within that attitude, you gain a certain sense of responsibility. You feel as though that you are in a position to change what you experience. And lo and behold, if you believe that's the case, it ends up happening. And you actually gain a certain degree of control over your neurophysiology. You increase the amount of serotonin or dopamine in your brain, or whatever it may end up being there. You end up changing your neural chemistry based upon a choice that you end up making. But again, I just wanted to point out that the mind should be your friend. It should be for your advantage. And again, if your system doesn't correlate with reality, if what you experience is different from what your model predicted, again, you need to sort of go back to the drawing board. And if your model of reality just doesn't improve the quality of your life, if it makes you feel alienated and isolated and jealous and never contented with anything that's around you, or anxious or worryful, whatever the case may end up being, if you're experiencing any of these emotions frequently, then your model of reality is not working all that great. And you can actually evaluate your system of understanding, I think, objectively. The first time I heard that, actually, I was a little confused as well, too. I'm like, well, how can you objectively evaluate different systems of understanding? But just as there are different ways of growing corn, there's different ways of performing medical operations, dentistry, or tuning up instruments, or what have you. There's carpentry, and you can sort of think about the quality of your experience as being one way that you can see as to whether or not your mind is working for you, that your system of understanding is actually improving your life, not making it more difficult.